it's a good thing. But the Torsen family, and well, like John Thompson is here now today, and he had a horse, and I had a horse, so we'd go riding together. And then when I was dating Connie, if we want to go riding together, I would borrow John's horse, and so that Connie and I could ride together. But back in those days, the whole neighborhood were friends or relatives, or friends and or relatives. It was a close-knit group, and we had a lot of fun together doing that.
In the well, the cistern, and he died. He died by drowning. The same time, let's see, just before George Torsen died. I think his name was Conrad, wasn't it? But it was one of the times they liked the name Conrad. So this was the first Conrad, and there was an open cistern on the property out in front of Elmer's house, and lo and behold, Conrad fell into it and drowned. And they were very close. I mean, Christina and Aletta were like sisters. They raised their children together, and consequently George was very close to the family. And he had hardening of the arteries, he had some issues obviously, and he was so saddened by Conrad's drowning, so the story goes, that it would just upset him so much that he died, I think, 2 days after, and the two of them, they had a common funeral. Wow. George Torsen and Conrad the First Thompson. So, very interesting stories.
It was a story about her grandpa, Edwin, that he always took in people who needed to eat and stay overnight, and he would feed them as long as they made wood, chopped up the wood for him. They had the wood there, but it needed to all be chopped up so it could go in the house. And one day the family came back, and Edwin was tied up, and he was scared, and he had been threatened. This person went through and ravaged the house. And after that, Clarine would never stay in the house alone.
And another thing about Mom is that her father owned a farm that had strawberries on it, lots of strawberries, and they had to have pickers. And so my mother was the main picker. She was the best picker. So when she was married, it was strawberry time, June 14th, and she had a conscience that bothered her a lot. She couldn't leave her parents with all that work, strawberry work. So she stayed overnight that first night, I think that first week, all the strawberries, before she got to live with her husband on the farm. So we always thought that was,
That's dedication.
Yeah, dedication. And they always had a big harvest, so of course that was what she did. So.
You were your dad's hired man?
Yeah.
Or your mother's hired girl?
No, it was more my dad's hired man. Drove horses and did a lot of outside work. I helped in the house too, but not as much as I did outside.
It was just Reg and I that grew up together. We grew up on the original Torsen homestead. Over a period of years, when my grandmother and grandfather owned the farm, my grandfather died at the age of 42. My father at that time was 12 years old. He had older brothers and younger brothers and a sister, and I don't know how he was picked out of the crowd, but at that time he was elected to stay home and continue to run the farm.
It's interesting how I got to go to college. I wanted to go to college, and I was a 4-H kid, and but I didn't have any money when I finished high school. And one day our county extension director, or we called them county agents, drove by and saw me in the yard and backed up and said, "I thought you were going to college." I told him I wanted to, but I didn't have any money, so I couldn't go. And he said, how about going to the farm short course? And I said, well, I still don't have any money. He said, you don't need money. I've got an NYA job, which was one of the federal, like WPA and all these things. National Youth Organization, I think. And he says, you can have the job. So I took it. So it sounded interesting. When I got to Madison, my job was pitching down silage from 4 silos that were used in a research project. And that wasn't too bad. After I sent home and got an extra set of clothes to wear while I pitched down silage and didn't stink up the classroom.
But you probably still, because you didn't take a shower after you got out of the silo.
Anyway, it worked out all right. The next year,
That was a $100 scholarship, wasn't it?
well, it was amounted to $100, yeah.
Or a quarter?
No, it was the whole course. Course lasted 15 weeks,
Okay.
and it was $96 for 15 weeks is what it was.
A book was written about what happened in the olden days when the brightest of the bright women became the school teachers. They didn't go into medicine. They didn't go into business. They didn't, all those other avenues weren't open. They went into teaching. And so they were taught by these women of great intellect, renown, did marvelous things in their communities. And I think there could be something to that. So they got a wonderful education here in Valders.
Did all of you help outside?
Judy did later on. She was 8 years younger than me, Dorothy didn't do as much outdoors, no, but Dorothy was good in the house. She helped Mother with the work. Mother was a gardener. She loved her gardens, flowers and vegetables, and so she'd be out working in that, and Dorothy would be doing the housework. We always teased her. We said she can't go in the barn and milk cows because her fingernails are too long. And it was true. Couldn't milk her.
That didn't interfere with housework.
No, not well. Didn't have to worry about the cows in the house.
Yeah.
I can't even describe them. They were so wonderful. My father was a 4-H leader of the boys. My mother was a 4-H leader for the girls. And so we learned to sew early and learned to take care of ourselves. And my brother, Conrad, was a chief caretaker of horses and cows and calves, and he usually won the first prize. And then a lot of accidents on the way too. You know how animals are.
I remember one summer I came here, and my grandpa showed me all of this manure that was on the ground. And there was a manure spreader right next to it, but for some reason, all that manure was on the ground, and I think he told me that something was broken or whatever. I don't know how it ended up there and not in the manure spreader, because right up here was a conveyor belt, right, Jim? Conveyor belt that would take the manure down. It would go right in the manure spreader, and they could take it out to the fields. Well, for some reason, it didn't get in that manure spreader. So I said to my grandpa, I said, well, I'll load it in there. I'll get it in there. Well, I was, again, 8, 9 years old, and I thought this was a great thing I could do for my grandpa. So I shoveled and shoveled and shoveled. I don't know how long it took me, but I cleared out that whole pile. And when my grandpa came and saw it, he said, Mark, he said, you've really helped me. And that made me feel just like $1 million.
So we had so much fun. Everett was a very handy guy. He built us stilts and a little car that he got stuff from the railroad, because they'd fix things at the railroad and they'd leave their stuff there. He'd go and pick it all up and make something. He made a car, and we had a dog that pulled the car. And the neighbors all came over and just had a lot of fun with us. And we had a great neighborhood, and all mixed up. It was Catholic, it was Lutheran, it was German Lutheran, it was, just very, very nice neighborhood. And everybody helped each other, which is unusual nowadays.
What do you think is the most important thing you learned from your upbringing?
Well, not waste anything. Clean your plate. And don't, also to take into consideration other people's feelings and not be rude to people and that kind of thing. Then I fell down a flight of stairs in high school and tore cartilage in my knee and had to have surgery, and I was out a couple of months with that. In those days they didn't let you go right back, and I was told I would never walk again by a group of 3 doctors that came into the hospital and said I would never walk again. But when I got home, my mother wasn't satisfied with that. There was no therapy in those days or anything. But so she would take me into the living room and set me on the piano bench, and she'd start bending on that knee. And my knee was straight out, perfectly straight. I couldn't move it. I couldn't do a thing. She'd bend, and I'd laugh as hard as I could, and she'd cry. And Judy still tells about not being able to stay in the house. She'd have to go outside because she couldn't stand it. But it was several months. And then the whole summer, and I went back to school in the fall, still on crutches, but I was walking again. And I did walk, and I danced many, many miles after that. So.
My favorite event at the farm was threshing season. Each year until the last year I was there, a whole crew would come in. We'd start at Uncle George's and then would come to Grandpa's farm, and I would drive tractor all day long. Here I am, 9 years old or whatever it is, and I'm driving tractor, and I thought this was the cat's meow. So I would drive the tractor down the field with a wagon behind it, and these men would be there, and they'd pick up the grain and throw it in the wagon until the wagon was full, and then I'd haul it up to the barn, and I'd jump off the tractor, and Grandpa would take it from there, and then I'd get on the next tractor and the wagon and head back down the field, and this went on all day long. So, I was out in the bright sunshine all day long. I think I must have gotten really brown. The sun was hot many of those days, and I was driving tractor. But what I remember the most were the meals. The Bible talks about heaven might be like a great banquet. Well, this was about as close to heaven as I can imagine. We had enormous meals at threshing time. I remember Brigitta and Elmira and Eva Jean came home to help out their mother. It was such a big deal, and other women were there from neighboring farms. And we had every kind of meat you could imagine. We had potatoes. We had breads of all kinds. We had every dessert you could imagine, from pies to cakes to cookies. It was a feast, and we'd eat like kings, and then go back out. And there was always a lot left over in the evening too that we could eat. So I loved threshing season, and Grandma also had a big garden, so she'd have every fruit and vegetable you could imagine as well. We even went up to Sturgeon Bay one time, picked cherries, and brought those back. And so threshing season. On a plaintive note, I remember the last year I went up there. Grandpa was not healthy at that time, but what he had was a combine. He must have rented a combine, and no more threshing. And he asked me to jump up and ride around the field with him. So I rode around the field with him once on the combine, and then I said I'd like to get off. So I jumped off the combine, and as I was walking back to the house, I thought, I'm not needed here anymore. Something has changed here, and it just seemed like my days at the farm were over. A sad time.